Maya Richardson had learned long ago that some people see you before they ever look at you. At 53 years old, she'd spent 28 years working as a senior operations supervisor at JFK's Terminal 4, and she'd witnessed more injustice in those fluorescent-lit corridors than most people saw in a lifetime. Tonight was supposed to be simple. Her shift at the operations desk overlooked Gate A14, where Atlantic Skyways Flight 307 to Geneva was boarding. Maya had her thermos of chamomile tea, her logbook, and a quiet corner where she could monitor the gates while finishing her monthly reports. She was a woman of routines, of small comforts carved from long nights of watching travelers rush past. She noticed him immediately, not because he stood out negatively, but because he carried himself with the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of earning respect. The black man in the charcoal suit moved through the terminal like he belonged there, his expensive leather briefcase swinging gently at his side. Maya's trained eye caught the gleam of his watch, the perfect press of his shirt collar, the way other business travelers unconsciously made space for him. She watched him approach Gate A14, saw Brenda Hayes behind the counter, and felt her stomach tighten with an old, familiar dread. Maya had worked alongside Brenda for 7 years, and she knew that look, the way Brenda's eyes narrowed, the subtle shift in her posture from professional to defensive. Maya had tried, God knows she'd tried, to mentor the younger woman, to smooth out those sharp edges of judgment that Brenda carried like armor. Lord, not tonight, Maya whispered to herself, setting down her pen. She couldn't hear the initial exchange, but she could read body language like scripture. The man presented his documents with a polite smile. Brenda's response was cold, dismissive. Maya saw the moment Brenda's hand moved to snatch the boarding pass, saw the theatrical scrutiny, the deliberate delay. Maya's hand moved to her radio, hovering over the call button. She'd intervened before in situations like this, but each time she did, she paid a price. Doug Peterson, the shift manager and Brenda's protector, had written her up twice last year for overstepping operational boundaries when she'd corrected Brenda's treatment of passengers. At 53, with retirement just 7 years away, Maya couldn't afford to lose this job. But watching injustice and doing nothing was a different kind of cost, one that ate at your soul in the quiet hours before dawn. The crowd around the gate was growing restless. Maya saw the older white woman in first class watching with interest, saw the heavy-set businessman smirking, and she saw something else. The precise moment when the man in the charcoal suit realized this wasn't a simple delay. This was personal. Maya stood up, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd spent nearly 3 decades being the quiet one, the careful one, the black woman who smiled and nodded and never made waves. But there were moments when silence became complicity, and she felt that moment arriving like a train she couldn't stop. Her radio crackled. Doug Peterson's voice barked through. "Maya, I need you covering the baggage situation at Carousel 7. Now." She looked at the gate, looked at her radio, made her choice. "Copy that, Doug," she said softly. "On my way." Maya gathered her things with shaking hands, but before she left her post, she did one small act of resistance. She opened her logbook and wrote down everything she was seeing. The time, the gate number, the passenger, and the agent. She noted Brenda's behavior with clinical precision. If this went south, if this man needed a witness, she would have a record. It wasn't much, but it was something. As she walked toward the escalators, Maya glanced back one more time. The man was reaching into his jacket, pulling out something that caught the light. Even from a distance, she could see Brenda's face go pale, could see the moment the power shifted. Maya whispered a prayer for him, for herself, and for all the people who'd been judged by their skin before anyone bothered to see their soul. The storm was coming, and this time she wouldn't look away. Part 2. The man they underestimated, Adrian Cole, had been called many things in his 42 years. Brilliant, ruthless, calculating, visionary. The senior partner at Sterling and Finch commanded respect in boardrooms from Manhattan to Mumbai. He'd built his career on reading people, on understanding the subtle power dynamics that separated winners from casualties in the brutal world of high finance. But all that expertise, all that hard-won authority, seemed to evaporate the moment he stepped up to gate A14. The agent, a tired-looking woman whose name tag read Brenda Hayes, looked at him with eyes that had already convicted him of something. Adrian knew that look. He'd seen it in luxury hotels when he arrived before his white colleagues. He'd seen it in restaurants where hostesses suddenly couldn't find his reservation. He'd seen it in the faces of police officers who pulled him over in his own neighborhood, demanding to know why he was driving an expensive car. "Good evening," Adrian said, maintaining the professional warmth that had served him through countless negotiations. "Adrian Cole, first class." Brenda didn't look up. When she finally did, her expression shifted from bored indifference to cold suspicion in the space of a heartbeat. She snatched his boarding pass from the scanner with theatrical caution, turning it over as if examining a counterfeit bill. "Let me see that again," she muttered, not to him, but to the air between them. Adrian felt his jaw tighten. He'd left his office at 4:30 that afternoon, navigating traffic from Lower Manhattan, to make this 8:45 flight with time to spare. The Geneva deal was worth $200 million. His client, a European banking consortium, was expecting him at 9 tomorrow morning, Swiss time. Everything depended on precision, on clockwork reliability. And now he was being delayed by a gate agent who decided he didn't look like he belonged in first class. "Is there an issue?" Adrian asked, keeping his voice level professional. Years of navigating predominantly white corporate spaces had taught him that showing anger, even justified anger, would only confirm their assumptions. "I'm not seeing the first-class designation properly updated in the system," Brenda said smoothly, her tone suggesting she'd found evidence of fraud. "With all due respect, sir, I need to verify your identity against the booking confirmation. Standard security protocol for unverified premium seating." Adrian's eyes narrowed. He could see his seat assignment glowing on her screen. 1A first class, confirmed 3 months ago when he'd booked this trip. This wasn't a system error. This was a choice. "It's seat 1A, Adrian said, pointing to the printed number on his boarding pass. "I booked it 3 months ago through the corporate portal. Everything is confirmed." Brenda leaned back, crossing her arms. The gesture was subtle but unmistakable. She was digging in. Behind him, Adrian could hear the shuffle of other passengers, the rustle of impatience. He was being made into a spectacle. "Sir," Brenda said, lowering her voice just enough to seem confidential while ensuring nearby passengers could hear every word, "your demeanor is a little suspicious. And frankly, I find your insistence on bypassing standard verification procedures concerning." The word "suspicious" landed like a physical blow. Adrian felt heat rush up his neck, felt the familiar rage of being reduced, diminished, profiled. Around him, he sensed the shift in the crowd. An older white woman in expensive jewelry was watching with raised eyebrows. A heavy-set man in a rumpled suit actually smirked. This was the game. Question his legitimacy, make him defensive, then use his reaction as proof of the original suspicion. Adrian took a slow, deliberate breath. He'd built an empire by staying 3 moves ahead of everyone else. This woman had no idea who she was dealing with, but she was about to learn an expensive lesson about assumptions. "Agent Hayes," Adrian said, his voice dropping into the register he used when closing deals, cold and precise as surgical steel. "I am flying to Geneva for a major transaction that will be worth more to your airline than your annual salary. I have presented you with a valid passport and a confirmed first-class ticket. I am asking you, professionally and clearly, to scan my boarding pass and allow me to board my flight." Brenda's face flushed. She leaned forward, her professionalism cracking to reveal something uglier beneath. "Sir, if you continue to be difficult, I will call airport security immediately. I believe this ticket may be invalid, and your aggressive behavior is only making me more concerned." The junior agent beside her, A pale young man whose name tag read Gary looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. His eyes darted between Adrian and Brenda, clearly recognizing the disaster unfolding but too intimidated to intervene. Adrian had reached his breaking point, not because he was losing control, but because he'd made a decision. Some battles you walk away from, others you finish. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket with deliberate slowness, maintaining eye contact with Brenda the entire time. What he pulled out wasn't his wallet or another form of identification. It was a slim black leather case, expensive and understated. He opened it with one hand and held it up directly in front of Brenda's face, close enough that she couldn't look away, far enough that it was clearly a gesture of controlled power. The terminal lights caught the gold badge inside: Chairman's Circle, Lifetime Global Access, Atlantic Skyways. Brenda's face went from flushed to ashen in 3 seconds. Part 3. The weight of a badge. Maya Richardson stood at Carousel 7, pretending to coordinate a baggage issue while her mind remained locked on gate A14. Through the terminal's vast windows, she could see the boarding area, could see the small crowd that had gathered, drawn by whatever drama was unfolding at the podium. Her radio crackled again. "Maya, you getting this baggage situation handled or what?" Doug Peterson's voice carried that edge of irritation that meant he was juggling too many problems and looking for someone to blame. "Almost resolved, Doug," Maya replied, watching a perfectly functioning carousel deliver luggage without issue. There was no baggage situation. Doug had just wanted her away from her post, away from whatever was happening at Brenda's gate. That realization settled in her stomach like cold lead. Maya had spent 28 years learning to read between the lines of airport operations, understanding the unspoken hierarchy that governed who got protected and who got sacrificed. Doug protected Brenda because Brenda made him look good on paper. Efficient processing times, few complaints that couldn't be buried, a willingness to enforce rules with the kind of aggressive certainty that management sometimes mistook for competence. But Maya had seen the other side. She'd watched Brenda delay families with accents, question the documents of passengers whose skin was too dark, whose clothes weren't expensive enough, whose very presence seemed to offend Brenda's narrow vision of who belonged in first class. Maya had tried to address it through proper channels, had documented incidents in careful, neutral language. Nothing had changed, because in Doug's eyes, Brenda was an asset, and Maya was a liability who asked too many uncomfortable questions. Her phone buzzed. A text from Lisa Chen, one of the ticket counter supervisors and one of Maya's few real friends in the terminal. "Girl, you need to see what's happening at A14. Your instincts were right about Brenda. This is bad." Maya's heart hammered. She glanced around, saw that the baggage claim was running smoothly, and made a decision that would either cost her nothing or everything. She started walking back toward the gates, her supervisor badge swinging from its lanyard, her mind racing through contingencies. By the time she reached a position where she could see gate A14 clearly, the confrontation had reached its peak. Even from 50 feet away, she could see Brenda's stricken expression, could see the tall man in the charcoal suit holding something up that caught the light like gold. Maya's breath caught. She knew what that was. She'd only seen one in person, years ago, when a member of the airline's board of directors had passed through the terminal. Chairman's Circle, the most exclusive status the airline offered, reserved for passengers who spent millions, who had direct access to executive leadership, who could make or break careers with a single phone call. And Brenda had just called him suspicious. Gary, the junior agent, was practically vibrating with panic, his hands moving frantically over his keyboard. Maya could read his body language even from a distance. He was trying to fix what couldn't be fixed, trying to undo what had already been set in motion. Maya pulled out her own tablet, accessing the gate management system with her supervisor credentials. She pulled up the passenger manifest for Flight 307, found the name Adrian Cole in Seat 1A, and felt her stomach drop when she saw the string of codes attached to his profile. Chairman's Circle, priority handling, VIP notification required, corporate relationship, Sterling and Finch, preferred partner status. Every single protocol had been violated. Every single safeguard that should have prevented this exact situation had been ignored because Brenda had made a judgment based on nothing more than the color of a man's skin. Maya started recording notes in the system, time-stamping everything, creating a parallel record of the incident. If corporate came looking, and they would come looking, she wanted to make sure there was at least one supervisor on record who had tried to track what went wrong. Her radio erupted with Doug's voice, no longer annoyed but genuinely alarmed. "Maya, I need you at gate A14 immediately. We have a situation. Gary's calling for supervisor assistance." "On my way," Maya said, already moving. As she approached the gate, she could see Adrian Cole had lowered the badge and was speaking in a voice that was quiet but carried like thunder. She couldn't hear his exact words, but she could see their impact. Brenda looked like she was facing a firing squad. The gathered passengers were watching with a mixture of fascination and second-hand embarrassment. The older white woman was shaking her head, making disapproving sounds. Maya reached the podium just as Gary finished his squeaked explanation about the Chairman's Circle status. Adrian's eyes flicked to her supervisor badge, assessing, calculating. "Mr. Cole," Maya said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I'm Maya Richardson, Operations Supervisor. On behalf of Atlantic Skyways, I want to apologize for this delay. I see that your status wasn't properly recognized, and I'm going to personally ensure you're boarded immediately with all appropriate courtesies." It was a risk, inserting herself into Doug's territory, but Maya had made her decision back at the carousel. Some prices were worth paying. Adrian studied her for a long moment, and Maya saw something shift in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, the understanding that she was offering him something Brenda never had. Genuine respect, acknowledgement of the wrong done, human dignity. "Thank you, Miss Richardson," Adrian said quietly. He picked up his boarding pass, which Gary had finally processed, and looked once more at Brenda. "Agent Hayes, I want nothing from you. No apology, no explanation. I just want you to understand that actions have consequences." Then he walked onto the jet bridge, his shoulders straight, his dignity intact despite everything. The silence he left behind was deafening. Maya turned to Brenda, whose hands were shaking, and to Gary, who looked like he might be sick. "Both of you step away from the counter," Maya said quietly. "I'm taking over this gate until the flight departs." Brenda opened her mouth to protest, but whatever she saw in Maya's face made her close it again. They moved aside, and Maya began the process of boarding the remaining passengers with quiet efficiency, her mind already composing the incident report she knew would land like a bomb in the morning. Doug arrived 15 minutes later, red-faced and already spinning damage control. But Maya had already finished her notes, already created a record that couldn't be erased or modified. For the first time in 28 years, she'd chosen truth over safety. Whatever came next, she'd face it knowing she'd finally done the right thing. Part 4. The email that changed everything. Adrian Cole settled into Seat 1A, the first-class suite that should have been his sanctuary after a long day. The leather was buttersoft, the lighting was perfectly dimmed, and the flight attendant, a professional woman named Camilla Jensen, was treating him with the kind of reverence usually reserved for diplomats. But Adrian couldn't relax. The rage was still there, cold and focused, sitting in his chest like a block of ice that refused to melt. "Mr. Cole," Camilla said softly, appearing with a crystal glass of wine, "I understand there was an incident at the gate. On behalf of the entire crew, please accept our deepest apologies. The captain has been informed of your status, and we want to ensure your flight is as comfortable as possible." Adrian accepted the wine with a polite nod, but he was barely tasting it. His mind was already 3 moves ahead, calculating costs and consequences, planning his next steps with the same precision he brought to billion-dollar acquisitions. He pulled out his phone and opened his email. The cabin lights dimmed further as the plane pushed back from the gate, and in that cocoon of expensive privacy, Adrian began to type. The recipient was Robert Sterling, Chief Operating Officer of Atlantic Skyways. Adrian had closed a major financing deal with Robert 5 years ago, restructuring debt that had saved the airline millions. They'd maintained a professional friendship since then, the kind of relationship built on mutual respect and occasional rounds of golf at exclusive clubs. This email would test that relationship. Adrian kept the tone clinical, devoid of emotion. He detailed the facts: the time, the location, the specific actions taken by Agent Brenda Hayes. He described how she'd refused to scan a valid ticket, how she'd manufactured a system error that didn't exist, how she'd used the word suspicious loud enough for surrounding passengers to hear. He noted the intervention of Supervisor Maya Richardson, whose professionalism had stood in stark contrast to the agent's behavior. He requested a full review of Hayes's operational history and a comprehensive investigation into whether this represented an isolated incident or a pattern of discriminatory conduct. What Adrian didn't include in the email was any mention of race. He didn't need to. The facts spoke for themselves, and Robert Sterling was intelligent enough to read between the lines. Adrian was giving him the opportunity to handle this internally, professionally, before it became the kind of public relations nightmare that could cost the airline millions in reputation and legal exposure. Adrian reread the email 3 times, refining each word until it carried maximum impact with minimum emotion. Then he hit send and watched the message disappear into the digital void. The wine tasted better after that. Across the aisle, an older gentleman in a navy suit was watching him with undisguised interest. After a moment, the man leaned slightly toward Adrian. "Excuse me," the man said in a cultured British accent. "I couldn't help but overhear some of that situation at the gate. Absolutely appalling behavior from that agent. I'm James Whitmore, by the way. I'm the CEO of Whitmore Financial in London." Adrian shook his extended hand. "Adrian Cole, Sterling and Finch." James's eyebrows rose. "Sterling and Finch, you're the Adrian Cole who structured the global tech acquisition. Brilliant work, absolutely brilliant. Makes what happened down there even more unconscionable." He paused, then lowered his voice. "I assume you're not letting this go." "I sent an email to the COO," Adrian said simply. "The rest will take care of itself." James smiled, a knowing expression. "Robert Sterling, yes, I know him. Good man. He'll handle this properly, I imagine. Still, if you need any additional support, testimonial statements from fellow passengers, that sort of thing, I'd be happy to provide one. What that woman did wasn't just unprofessional. It was discriminatory, and frankly, it's the kind of behavior that makes the rest of us complicit if we stay silent." Adrian felt something shift in his chest, the cold anger warming slightly toward something more complex. This stranger, this white British CEO, was offering to stand as a witness, to put his own reputation on the line to support Adrian's complaint. It was the kind of allyship that was rare and valuable. "Thank you," Adrian said, and meant it. "I may take you up on that." They exchanged business cards, and Adrian tucked James's into his wallet, another piece of evidence, another voice that could speak truth if needed. Hours later, as the plane cruised over the dark Atlantic, Adrian's phone buzzed with an email notification. He glanced at the screen and felt his pulse quicken. Robert Sterling had responded personally, and the message was time-stamped just 23 minutes after Adrian had sent his original email. "Adrian, I just read your message and I am absolutely horrified. This is inexcusable on every level. I am immediately launching a full investigation, and I've already contacted our VP of Operations to secure all gate recordings and system logs. We will get to the bottom of this tonight. I will call you directly as soon as I have more information. Please know that this does not represent the values of Atlantic Skyways, and we take full responsibility for this failure." Adrian set down his phone and looked out the window at the darkness beyond. Somewhere far below, the ocean stretched endlessly. Somewhere behind him, at JFK Terminal 4, people were scrambling, systems were being reviewed, and careers were beginning to crumble. He hadn't yelled, hadn't made a scene, hadn't played into any of the stereotypes that Brenda Hayes had been so ready to believe. He'd simply documented the truth and sent it to someone with the power to act. That was the difference between rage and justice. Rage burned hot and faded fast. Justice was cold, patient, and utterly relentless. Adrian closed his eyes and finally allowed himself to rest. By the time he landed in Geneva, the wheels would already be in motion. Brenda Hayes had made her choice at that gate. Now she would live with the consequences. And Adrian, he would close his deal, secure his acquisition, and continue building the career that people like Brenda couldn't imagine a man with his skin could achieve. That was the best revenge of all, succeeding so completely that their prejudice became irrelevant. Part 5. The reckoning begins. Maya Richardson's phone rang at 11:45 that night, just as she was finally settling into bed after her shift. The caller ID showed Atlantic Skyways Operations Center, and Maya's stomach clenched. Late-night calls from corporate were never good news. "This is Maya," she answered, sitting up and turning on her bedside lamp. "Miss Richardson, this is Vanessa Brown, Executive Vice President of Operations." The voice was crisp, professional, and carried the weight of serious authority. "I'm calling because your name appears in the incident log for Gate A14, Flight 307. I need you to come back to the terminal immediately. A car is already on its way to your address." Maya's heart hammered. "Ma'am, I can explain what happened. I documented everything in my supervisor notes." "Miss Richardson," Vanessa interrupted gently, "you're not in trouble. In fact, your documentation is exactly why I'm calling you first. But I need your full statement tonight while everything is fresh. This is urgent, and it's coming from the very top of the company." The car arrived 20 minutes later, a black sedan with an airline logo on the door. Maya dressed quickly in her uniform, her mind racing. Corporate investigations moved like glaciers normally, taking weeks or months to process complaints. For them to mobilize this fast, with executive-level involvement, meant Adrian Cole's complaint had landed like a nuclear bomb. The operations center at JFK was in a secure building separate from the main terminals, a place where most frontline employees never set foot. Maya was escorted through security checkpoints and into a conference room where 3 people waited. Vanessa Brown, a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and penetrating eyes. Mateo Thorne, head of internal security, whose presence made Maya's pulse jump. And Lisa Rodriguez, VP of Employee Relations, who gave Maya a small, reassuring nod. "Miss Richardson, thank you for coming in so quickly," Vanessa said, gesturing to a chair. "I want to be direct with you. Earlier tonight, we received a formal complaint from Adrian Cole, a Chairman's Circle Lifetime member, regarding discriminatory treatment by gate agent Brenda Hayes. Your name appears in multiple places in the system logs as someone who attempted to intervene and who documented the incident with unusual thoroughness." Maya sat down, her hands folded in her lap. "Yes, ma'am. I observed the situation from my post and recognized that Agent Hayes was violating multiple protocols. I attempted to intervene when I arrived at the gate, but by that point, Mr. Cole was already boarding." Mateo leaned forward, his expression neutral but focused. "Walk us through what you saw from the beginning. Don't leave anything out." Maya took a breath and began to speak. She described watching Adrian approach the gate, the immediate change in Brenda's demeanor, the deliberate delays and manufactured concerns. She explained how Doug Peterson had called her away from her observation post at precisely the moment the confrontation escalated, how she'd documented everything in real time, and how she'd returned to find Gary in a panic and Brenda frozen in shock. "I've worked with Agent Hayes for 7 years," Maya said carefully, "and this isn't the first time I've observed her treating passengers differently based on their appearance. I've submitted reports before, but they were never acted upon. Vanessa and Lisa exchanged a look that Maya couldn't quite read. "We found those reports," Lisa said quietly. "4 formal complaints over 3 years, all documented with specific dates and passenger details, all filed through proper channels. Can you tell us what happened after you filed them?" Maya felt old anger rising, carefully contained. "Nothing happened. My shift manager, Doug Peterson, told me I was being oversensitive. He said Brenda was following security protocols and that I needed to focus on my own responsibilities. The last time I filed a report, 6 months ago, I received a written warning for creating unnecessary documentation that reflected poorly on team morale." The silence in the room was heavy with implication. Vanessa typed something on her laptop, then looked back at Maya. "Miss Richardson, I need to ask you a difficult question. Why did you keep documenting incidents if your reports were being ignored and you were facing retaliation?" Maya met her eyes steadily. "Because someone needed to bear witness. Because I knew that one day someone would ask questions and I wanted there to be answers. Because staying silent felt like being complicit, even if speaking up cost me." Vanessa's expression softened slightly. "You understand that your testimony and documentation are going to form the backbone of our investigation?" "Yes, ma'am." "And you understand that this investigation will likely result in terminations, potentially including your direct supervisor?" Maya felt a flutter of fear, quickly suppressed. "I understand." "Good." Vanessa closed her laptop. "Then I want to be clear about something, Miss Richardson. You're not here as a witness against your colleagues. You're here because you demonstrated exactly the kind of integrity and courage that this company should have been rewarding all along. As of tomorrow morning, you're being promoted to Terminal Operations Manager with full authority over all gate and counter operations in Terminal 4. Your salary will reflect that position, and you'll report directly to regional management, not to anyone in the current supervisory chain." Maya couldn't speak, couldn't process what she was hearing. Lisa smiled, the first genuine warmth Maya had seen in the room. "You did the right thing, Maya, multiple times at personal cost. That matters. And now we're going to make sure it matters in ways that actually change how this terminal operates." Tears pricked at Maya's eyes, but she blinked them back. 28 years of being careful, being quiet, being the woman who documented injustice but never expected justice in return. And now, because one man had refused to accept discrimination and had the power to demand accountability, everything was changing. "Thank you," Maya said, her voice rough with emotion. "Thank you for listening." "Thank you for speaking," Vanessa replied. "Now we need your help with the next phase. We're interviewing Agent Hayes and Shift Manager Peterson tonight. Your documentation will be entered as evidence, and we need you to be available to answer questions as we proceed." Maya nodded, straightening in her chair. For the first time in years, she felt the weight she'd been carrying begin to lift. Justice was coming, not just for Adrian Cole, but for every passenger who'd been judged unfairly, every complaint that had been buried, every voice that had been silenced. The reckoning had begun, and Maya Richardson was finally on the right side of it. Part 6. The Price of Prejudice. Brenda Hayes sat in a small, windowless interview room, her hands shaking as she clutched a paper cup of cold coffee. It was 3:15 in the morning, and she'd been here for over an hour, answering questions from people whose titles she barely understood but whose authority was unmistakable. Across the table, Lisa Rodriguez watched her with an expression that might have been pity if it weren't so professionally distant. Next to Lisa, Mateo Thorne had a laptop open, its screen reflecting in his glasses as he scrolled through what Brenda now knew were system logs, CCTV footage, and witness statements. "Brenda," Lisa said quietly, "we've now reviewed the complete record. The gate camera shows Mr. Cole approached your counter at 8:47. His boarding pass scanned successfully at 8:48, but you manually overrode the system to reject it. Can you explain why?" Brenda's throat was dry. She'd been trying to explain for an hour, but everything she said sounded weaker than the last attempt. "I thought there might be a security concern." He seemed agitated. Mateo turned the laptop so Brenda could see the screen. The footage showed Adrian Cole approaching with a polite smile, placing his documents on the counter and speaking calmly. "This is the moment you described as agitated," Mateo said, his tone flat. "Can you point out the agitation?" Brenda stared at the screen. The man in the video looked composed, professional, patient. Nothing about his body language suggested aggression or concern. She'd been so certain in the moment, so convinced she was right. But seeing it played back, stripped of her assumptions and fears, the truth was inescapable. She'd profiled him, made a judgment based on nothing but the color of his skin and her own biases. And then she doubled down, tripled down, until the lie became so big she couldn't take it back without admitting what she'd done. "I made a mistake," Brenda whispered. "You called a chairman's circle member suspicious," Lisa said, her voice still quiet but now carrying an edge. "You publicly questioned his legitimacy. You manufactured a system error that didn't exist. And then, according to multiple witnesses, you threatened him with security when he asked to speak to a supervisor." "I panicked," Brenda said, tears starting to fall. "I didn't know he was Chairman's Circle. I didn't see the codes." Mateo clicked something on his laptop. "The Chairman's Circle designation appears in 3 places on your screen, here, here, and here." He pointed to bright indicators in the footage. "You would have had to deliberately ignore all 3 to claim you didn't see them." Brenda couldn't speak, couldn't defend herself. The evidence was overwhelming, and worse, it was all true. She had seen those indicators. She'd ignored them because they didn't fit what she'd already decided about the passenger. Lisa closed her folder. "Brenda, your employment with Atlantic Skyways is terminated effective immediately for gross misconduct, discrimination, and violation of company ethics policies. You'll be escorted from the building, and your final paycheck will be processed and mailed to your address within 5 business days." The words hit Brenda like physical blows. Terminated. Immediately. 7 years of employment gone in a single night because of one passenger, one moment of judgment, one catastrophic error. "I have 2 kids," Brenda said desperately. "I'm a single mother. I can't afford to lose this job. Please, I'll take a suspension, I'll take a demotion, anything. Just don't fire me." Lisa's expression finally showed something human, sadness mixed with resolution. "Those children deserve a mother who models integrity and respect for all people. What you did tonight wasn't just a policy violation. It was a moral failure, and Atlantic Skyways can't employ someone who treats passengers differently based on race." Security arrived to escort Brenda from the building. As she walked out, carrying her personal belongings in a cardboard box, she passed Maya Richardson in the hallway. Maya's expression was unreadable, but Brenda saw something in her eyes that might have been regret. "I tried to warn you," Maya said softly as Brenda passed. "Multiple times, I tried to help you see what you were doing." "I know," Brenda whispered. "I'm sorry, but sorry wasn't enough." Sorry couldn't undo the damage, couldn't restore her career, couldn't erase the video evidence that would follow her for years. 30 minutes later, Doug Peterson received the same devastating news. His termination came with additional consequences. A formal investigation into his pattern of suppressing employee complaints, and a potential lawsuit from the airline to recover costs associated with his attempted cover-up. Doug sat in his car in the employee parking lot at 4:30 in the morning, staring at his phone. He had 3 calls already from Brenda, but he couldn't bring himself to answer. What could he say? That he'd tried to protect her and destroyed them both. That he'd prioritized team loyalty over truth and paid the ultimate price. His phone rang again. This time it was his wife, Rachel. "Doug, where are you? Are you okay?" "I got fired," Doug said, his voice hollow. "Brenda too. It's over, Rachel. 7 years just gone." Rachel was silent for a long moment. Then, "What did you do?" "I tried to cover up a discrimination complaint. I told Brenda to falsify the incident report. I thought I was fixing a problem, but I just made it worse." "Oh, Doug," Rachel said, and the disappointment in her voice was worse than anger. "Why didn't you just do the right thing?" Doug didn't have an answer. He'd spent his career playing politics, protecting his team, managing up instead of leading ethically. He'd chosen loyalty to Brenda over accountability, and now they were both paying the price. By sunrise, the news had spread through the terminal. 2 terminations, unprecedented corporate involvement, investigations, and restructuring. The other gate agents whispered in break rooms, in bathrooms, in the parking lot during shift changes. And the message was clear. What happened at Gate A14 wasn't just about Brenda Hayes and Doug Peterson. It was about a culture that had tolerated discrimination, suppressed complaints, and protected the wrong people for too long. Change was coming to JFK Terminal 4. And it was coming because Adrian Cole had refused to accept injustice, and Maya Richardson had refused to stop documenting truth. The price of prejudice had finally come due. Part 7. Redemption and Grace. Adrian Cole stood in the conference room of a Geneva bank, closing the deal that would secure his firm's reputation for another decade. The acquisition was flawless, every term negotiated to perfection, every contingency addressed. His European counterparts were impressed, grateful, already discussing future collaborations. But Adrian's mind kept drifting back to JFK, to the woman whose career he'd ended with a single email, to the shift manager who tried to cover up discrimination, to the supervisor who'd shown him dignity when no one else would. His phone buzzed during a break, an email from Robert Sterling. Adrian, the investigation is complete. Both individuals have been terminated, and we're implementing comprehensive policy changes across all terminals. I want to personally thank you for bringing this to our attention. We've also extended your chairman's circle status to include your immediate family at no cost for the next 5 years, as a gesture of our commitment to making this right. You made us better today. Robert. Adrian stared at the email. He'd won, completely, decisively, with corporate backing and public vindication. Brenda Hayes would never work for an airline again. Doug Peterson's career in management was finished. The system had worked exactly as it should. So why did he feel this hollowness in his chest? That evening, back in his Geneva hotel room, Adrian opened his laptop and did something he'd been avoiding. He searched for Brenda Hayes online. What he found made his stomach turn. The story had leaked, not just to airline industry publications but to general news sites. Gate agent fired for discriminating against black executive. The articles included her name, her photo pulled from a LinkedIn profile, details of the incident that made her look not just incompetent but malicious. The comment sections were vicious. People were calling her every name imaginable, threatening her, finding her social media profiles and flooding them with harassment. Someone had posted her address. Others were calling for her children to be taken away. Adrian had wanted accountability. He'd wanted systemic change. He hadn't wanted a public execution. He kept searching and found something that made his heart sink further. A court filing. Hayes v. Hayes. A custody dispute. Brenda's ex-husband was using the Atlantic Skyways incident as evidence of moral instability, arguing that she was unfit to parent. Adrian closed his laptop and sat in silence for a long time. He'd been profiled, discriminated against, publicly humiliated. He'd had every right to file that complaint, to demand justice, to use his power to create consequences. But consequences had a way of cascading beyond their intended targets, sweeping up innocent bystanders in their wake. Brenda Hayes had 2 children, children who hadn't chosen their mother's prejudice, who didn't deserve to lose her because of one terrible decision. Adrian picked up his phone and called his personal attorney, Marcus Webb, a man who'd been with him through every major deal for the past decade. "Marcus, I need you to do something for me. Quietly. No paper trail that leads back to me." "What do you need?" Marcus asked. "There's a woman named Brenda Hayes. She's in a custody battle in Queens, New York. Her ex-husband is using a recent employment termination as evidence against her. I need you to retain the best family law attorney you can find and have them represent her. Pro bono from her perspective, but I'll cover all costs. The only condition is complete anonymity. She can never know who's paying for this." Marcus was silent for a moment. "Adrian, is this the woman from the airport, the one who discriminated against you?" "Yes." "You understand that helping her could complicate things if this becomes public. People might question your judgment." "I don't care what people think," Adrian said quietly. "I care about those kids. They didn't do anything wrong, and they shouldn't lose their mother because I exercised my right to file a complaint. Justice isn't the same as vengeance, Marcus. I want her to face consequences for discrimination, but I don't want her children to suffer for her mistakes." "You're a better man than most," Marcus said. "I'll handle it, discreetly." Adrian ended the call and sent one more email, this time to Vanessa Brown at Atlantic Skyways. "Vanessa, I want to thank you for handling the investigation so thoroughly and professionally. I also want to make a request. The company should consider offering Ms. Hayes access to professional counseling and bias training as part of her termination package. Not to reinstate her, but to give her the tools to learn from this and do better in her next role. Discrimination often comes from ignorance rather than malice, and people can change if given the opportunity." Adrian, he hit send and finally felt the hollowness in his chest begin to ease. This was the balance he'd been seeking: accountability without cruelty, justice tempered with mercy, the power to destroy wielded with the wisdom to restore. Adrian had proven he belonged in first class not just because of his wealth or his status, but because of his character. And character meant knowing when to push and when to show grace, when to demand consequences, and when to offer redemption. Brenda Hayes would never know that the man she'd discriminated against had saved her from losing her children. She would never thank him, never apologize properly, never fully understand the gift she'd been given. But Adrian would know. And that was enough. He opened his laptop one more time and drafted a final email, this one to Maya Richardson. "Miss Richardson, thank you for your intervention and your integrity. I've learned from Mr. Sterling that you've been promoted to Terminal Operations Manager. This is well-deserved and long overdue. I hope you'll use your new authority to ensure that what happened to me never happens to anyone else, regardless of their status or their ability to demand accountability. The real test of a just system isn't how it treats the powerful, but how it protects the vulnerable. Thank you for being the kind of person who speaks truth even when it costs you. The world needs more people like you." Adrian Cole, he sent the email and closed his laptop for the last time that night. Justice had been served. Grace had been extended. And Adrian Cole, the man who'd been profiled at a gate, had proven that true power lies not in destruction, but in the choice to rebuild. Part 8. The ripples of change. 6 months later, Maya Richardson stood at the front of a conference room in JFK Terminal 4, addressing a group of newly hired gate agents. The room was diverse in ways it hadn't been before. Young people of all backgrounds, carefully selected not just for efficiency but for empathy, trained not just in procedures but in recognizing and challenging their own biases. "I want to tell you a story," Maya began, her voice carrying the weight of experience and hard-won wisdom. 6 months ago, a passenger approached Gate A14 for a routine boarding. He had a valid ticket, a confirmed seat, and the highest loyalty status our airline offers. But the agent at the gate saw something else. She saw assumptions. She saw stereotypes. And she let those false perceptions override every protocol, every professional standard, every basic principle of human dignity. The new agents listened intently. They all knew this story. It had become part of the company's training, a case study in what not to do. "That agent lost her job," Maya continued. "Her supervisor lost his job, and our company learned an expensive lesson about the cost of discrimination. But more importantly, a passenger named Adrian Cole taught us something about the difference between power and justice." Maya clicked a remote, and a slide appeared on the screen. The company's new service charter, drafted in consultation with civil rights organizations and implemented across every terminal worldwide. Mr. Cole had every right to demand that agent's termination. He had every right to file lawsuits, to go to the media, to burn this company's reputation to the ground. But instead, he did something remarkable. He demanded accountability for the system, not just punishment for one person. He asked us to become better, not just to punish someone for being worse. Maya paused, looking at the young faces before her. That's what I want each of you to understand. Your job isn't just to process tickets. It's to recognize the humanity in every person who approaches your counter. The businessman in the expensive suit and the college student with a backpack deserve the same respect, the same courtesy, the same assumption of dignity. After the training session, Maya returned to her office, a real office now, with a door and a window, and found an envelope on her desk. Inside was a handwritten note on expensive stationery. Dear Miss Richardson, I wanted you to know that because of your courage and integrity, Atlantic Skyways has implemented mandatory bias training for all 14,000 customer-facing employees worldwide. I've been told that in the 6 months since the incident, complaints regarding discriminatory treatment have dropped by 68%. That's 68% fewer people who have to experience what I experienced. That's 68% fewer moments of injustice. Thank you for being willing to speak truth when it cost you. Thank you for documenting what others wanted to hide. And thank you for using your promotion to create lasting change. You didn't just witness justice. You built it. With respect and gratitude, Adrian Cole. Maya read the note 3 times, then carefully folded it and placed it in a frame on her desk, next to a photo of her grandchildren. Some victories were personal. Others rippled outward, touching lives you'd never meet, preventing injustices that would never happen because someone had the courage to stand up when it mattered. Across the city, in a modest apartment in Queens, Brenda Hayes sat at her kitchen table helping her daughter with homework. The past 6 months had been the hardest of her life. She'd lost her career, her reputation, her sense of self-worth. The public humiliation had been excruciating, the job search demoralizing, the financial strain overwhelming. But she'd kept her children. Against all odds, against her ex-husband's aggressive legal campaign, a miracle had occurred. An attorney named Elena Rossi had appeared, offering representation through some kind of charitable fund. Elena had been brilliant, fierce, compassionate. She'd helped Brenda document her years of devoted parenting, had challenged the narrative that one professional failure defined her entire character, had negotiated a custody arrangement that kept the family intact while acknowledging Brenda's need to rebuild her life. Brenda still didn't know who had paid for Elena's services. The anonymous benefactor remained a mystery, and the terms of the agreement forbade her from investigating. But sometimes, late at night when her children were asleep, Brenda wondered. She'd taken the mandatory bias training offered by Atlantic Skyways as part of her termination package. 8 weeks of intensive work with a counselor, examining her assumptions, confronting her prejudices, learning to see her own blind spots. It had been painful, humbling, transformative. She'd never work for an airline again. That door was permanently closed. But she'd found a job at a community center, helping recently incarcerated people navigate re-entry into society. The pay was low, barely enough to cover rent and groceries, but the work felt meaningful in ways her old job never had. "Mom," her daughter said, looking up from her math homework, "my teacher said we should always treat people the way we want to be treated, even if they're different from us." Brenda felt tears prick at her eyes. "Your teacher is absolutely right, baby. That's one of the most important lessons anyone can learn." "Did you know that already?" her daughter asked innocently. Brenda thought about Adrian Cole, about the way she'd looked at him and seen a threat instead of a person, about the assumptions she'd made, the dignity she'd stripped away, the chain of consequences she'd set in motion. "No," Brenda said quietly. "I had to learn it the hard way, but I'm grateful I learned it before it was too late." Her daughter returned to her homework, and Brenda sat in the small kitchen of her modest apartment, feeling something she hadn't felt in months: hope. Not for redemption. She knew she didn't deserve that, not really. but hope for the possibility of becoming better, of teaching her children the lessons her own prejudice had failed to learn, of making her mistake mean something by ensuring her children never repeated it. She would never know that the man she discriminated against had been the one who saved her family, would never know that his quiet grace had tempered the consequences she deserved, would never be able to thank him or apologize properly. But perhaps that was the point. True justice wasn't about gratitude or closure. It was about becoming better people, about building systems that protected the vulnerable, about recognizing that everyone deserved dignity regardless of their power to demand it. In his office in Lower Manhattan, Adrian Cole sat in a meeting with his partners, discussing the next acquisition, the next deal, the next challenge. His career had continued its upward trajectory, unaffected by the incident that had consumed so much emotional energy 6 months ago. But on his desk, in a simple frame, was a photograph from Geneva, him shaking hands with the European Banking Consortium, closing the deal that had seemed so important at the time. Behind the photo, folded carefully, was Maya Richardson's promotion announcement and a printed copy of Atlantic Skyway's new service charter. These were his real victories, not the deals, not the acquisitions, not the wealth or status, but the knowledge that he'd used his power to create change, that he'd demanded justice while extending grace, that he'd proven prejudice wrong not through anger but through character. The chairman's circle badge sat in a drawer in his desk, rarely used now. Adrian didn't need it to prove his worth. He'd proven something more important. That dignity comes not from status or recognition, but from how you treat others and how you respond when others fail to treat you with respect. The story that began at Gate A14 had ended not with revenge but with redemption, not with destruction but with reconstruction, not with bitterness but with the quiet satisfaction of knowing that sometimes justice and mercy can walk hand in hand. And in terminals across the world, in gate areas and boarding lines and customer service counters, the ripples of that one moment continued to spread. Fewer assumptions, more dignity, better questions, kinder answers. One man's refusal to accept discrimination had changed an entire company's culture. One woman's courage to document truth had transformed a career. One mother's painful lesson had become a chance to teach her children better values. The badge had opened a door to confrontation, but character had opened a door to change. And change, slow and imperfect as it was, had proven to be the most powerful force of all.